We have a little background music here today. I hope it's not too much of an annoyance. This is a wild guess. I may have to start this video all over again, but I've done my best to check it out. It won't last very long. It just seemed appropriate for the season, and some of the pictures we're going to show are also appropriate. For the purpose of discussing a point that Antiguos makes, Antiguos put out a note to me that had 3 or 4 bits of response to the video on signs, mannerisms, and so on. And but one of his middle comments was, "So you think a painter is better because he can copy well what he sees?" So, and by the way, he keeps putting in smileys in here, so he's not trying to antagonize. I might have to change his name to antagonize, but no, I don't. I really enjoy these kinds of discussions. So you think a painter is better because he can copy well what he sees? Perhaps in the Boston school thought, but other schools don't pursue that. A master like Claudio Bravo can show you what you see. Is that necessarily better? That last part, you lose me on that. I'm not sure what that means. The Claudio Bravo, the Trump sort of approach to, looked into kind of noodling. Is that necessarily better? There's no discussion here about whether a better or not better and that sort of thing when it comes to different kinds of painting, right? That isn't my point at all. It wasn't my point initially. But the point we were making was, or that he's actually making, comes from that discussion of Antaeus, and that's brought up a number of times by different painters, and I think Millet might have been the first time I saw somebody sourcing Antaeus. But Antaeus was a giant, a Greek giant, who could wrestle Hercules, the god Hercules, he could wrestle him to a standstill. He could stalemate Hercules. Hercules saw that this guy was of that sort, and kept working to figure out what in the heck to do. And he finally realized that all he had to do, he would noticeably weaken. Antaeus would noticeably weaken when when Hercules lifted his feet off the ground. So there's any number of visuals I could have given you for that story, but because lots of painters, artists, sculptors have done that subject. Hercules, the muscle Hercules, lifting up the giant, not always presented as a giant, lifting him up. He's always holding him up in the air, his feet off the ground, and that's what weakens him. And I want to say people like Ang, others, if my reason, I don't even remember the source, the number of times I've seen that, but they're simply talking about your proximity to nature in your work. And I think it's useful to talk about writing, and I've referred to this stuff. And by the way, I'm narrowing down on this today. We've talked about it before. I've alluded to it before, but I'm going to try to make it the topic of this. So if you want to look up that topic, you could look it up here. But what I liken it to, actually, no matter what kind of work you do as a novelist, whether you're a mystery writer, whether you're writing a long novel, even a historical novel, or any number of other kinds of writing of the sort that is intended to entertain, fiction writing. The one thing you have to do is you have to be convincing, meaning it has to appear to be like life. There's something about our entertainment. There's something about what we're doing. We want it to be about us. The viewer wants it to be about us, or we want to be convinced that it is about us. And so the more proximal you are as a writer, or even a movie maker, the more you convince me that this could be, the more you have me. And now, you could say that's just the story part of it, but it applies actually to the color relations and those sorts of things, right? So if your color relations, like in the world that I'm talking about, the music of the Impressionist, when you're playing it like Degas, you not only have to be making music, but it has to be plausible. It has to look like life could have produced those colors. And that's really all we mean by that. But let's look at pictures anyway, because it's what we do, right? I'll take some of the pictures from last week and then add some other ones to it. So you think a painter is better because he can copy well what he sees? Well, yeah, I think he's better that's one of the skills he needs to have, yeah? If he wants to be convincing, he has to understand nature. And the way to understand it is to copy and to learn to copy well, learn to make likenesses of the relationships of things, visual, and gain the ownership of the stuff you're working with. Now you'd say, perhaps, well, what about Rubens? He really isn't copying well what he sees. Well, again, I'm telling you, he's like a comic book to my mind. I mean, don't let people think I'm just putting him down, but you'll see how I compare him to other people, and I did last week. He's a little bit like that. He's a little bit of a caricaturist, right? But he's convincing at that, right? Daumier is a caricaturist, but he's convincing at that. And I'm saying that he's got that element. He hasn't forgotten the idea that he needs to maintain his feet on the ground. He has to actually be plausible. So, but perhaps in Boston School thought, a painter's better because he can copy what he sees. If you think Boston School painting is just copying what you see, you're missing the point. And that would be true of anybody else working in any other way. You know, there is a primary point to the thing you're doing, including the imaginative, the decorative. But there's an element that person, when he's doing it plausibly, that is, say, plausibly like nature, meaning he's put the time in studying it, is going to get a better reception. So, but no, is it necessarily better to simply copy nature, the Claudio Bravo thing? I don't think it's better at all to copy nature. I think the realist is on the wrong track, except for the purposes of understanding maybe better what he sees or handling nature until he begins to be master of it. But let's just look at some pictures, okay? One of those that probably started this conversation off, he mentioned Fragonard, but I'm going to start off with El Greco. And since it's Christmas, this is the this is the Nativity, the birth of Christ. And so here you, up in the left corner, oh, look at me without the arrow fix again, darn. Okay, guys, apologies. But here you see El Greco with the strangely elongated figures, small heads, but doing a very lovely picture of in his manner of the Nativity. Then here's a Rubens. Now, I'm not going to tell you ever that I think one of these is better than the other. I don't think that's the point, actually. And there's another point I may make by the time I get to the end if I don't forget it, but I don't want to make it now, and that is about the general tendency of great painters to be gradually more proximal to nature, more understanding, more deeply pursuing. But let's not make that our point today. I'm simply showing you two really nice pictures, one by Rubens, one by El Greco. And I'm not going to tell you there's one of these is better than the other. That isn't what I'm saying. These types may exist. So here's the Rembrandt Nativity, a little more convincing, right? And in multiple ways, it actually feels like it could be a night scene. The fire looks plausible. It looks like what would be a fire. Maybe it's just the light of the kid, but I think there's probably a fire there as well. And so he's done a bunch of stuff that's very plausible. And these are two different kinds of paintings. Each one of them, though, has this capacity to convince you. This one, despite the deformities, because he's unified his deformities all through this whole painting, that gives him credibility. In other words, he's saying, you may be making a comic book and maybe a black and white series of black and white images, but you have to be convincing within that modality that you've chosen. And that whatever element of life likeness it has, like need to be reasonably in the right place and that sort of thing, just to give it some conversation. So it doesn't make a difference what kind of painting you're doing. There's a level of your own work of proximity to nature that you're going to want to pursue. You're going to want to pursue it because it'll strengthen your work. And then here's Veronese. I've always admired this Veronese. It's a curious composition, but you're seeing all these different guys. Why would anybody compare or disparage the others? This one, possibly, of those we've looked at so far, in some ways, is the most realistically rendered. I don't say realistic in the sense of realism like Rembrandt, but in the sense of careful articulation with models. But so what? Yeah, you follow me. One of the things you'll notice in Veronese is greater and greater use of models, and so the figures become more convincing. Again, that's that point, right? So now, just because they were here, I decided to go ahead and run at you with there's the Annunciation thing. I mean, I'm sorry, the Nativity thing, and here's the crucifixion. There's these two great themes of God, if you want to say it that way, of Christ, the two great themes of Christian art. The Savior, the concept of the Savior sent from God. So here's the death of Christ. Here he is on a cross, very symbolic. All these people standing around in the right places, none of it looking like a real setting, just symbols, just little symbols of this and symbols of that. Really, I mean they're real people, but they don't. It looks like a piece of symbolism. Now here's a Rubens with that usual hyperbolic form and exaggerated musculature and all those sorts of things. Again, no discussion about which one of these is a better picture. There's not a better one. This is not a better case of better, although we do spend time, admittedly, trying to say what are the best 5 painters of all time. But the real reason for that is you're trying to sort out what would make a good painting, what makes paintings, what are the things you would aim at, for example, as a student? What are the things you would really strive for? And but if you're a symbolist, there'd be things in here you'd be striving for. If you're a storyteller, that kind of a symbol illustrator, then this would be better, maybe, right? Now, if you want poignancy, there's nobody probably like Rembrandt in terms of issuing forth the sensation, the poignancy, the pain of a scene like this. Well, the Christ, everybody's just a symbol. It doesn't, in the El Greco. And it's not a good or bad thing. It's a question of whether you're convincing within the medium you're working in, right? So that your ability to make figures the right relation size to each other and turn form and all those things in a way that's plausible, and then do it consistently throughout your picture. So, yeah, but the closer you get to the truth in terms of a storytelling picture like this, truth meaning convince me that it's really skin and the person has really died and people are really miserable or whatever it is. There's that whole convincing thing. Of course, the bottom line of painting isn't those things. Those are wonderful things, but it obviously is in the what makes it visual. Music is in a different place, not to be talked about today. So here's the Van Dyck, and again, if you look at the Rubens, you'll see that it has a lot of really marvelous drawing, that sort of thing, but there's something just a bit more, not as much more in this case as I look at it more closely. The Van Dyck, though, but Van Dyck's tendency, of course, as you'll see in a second, was to be more realistic, and you'll see in a minute what that brings to you. But anyway, so there's a Van Dyck next to the symbolic, as again I'm going to call it. This is not trying to be a symbol. This is trying to be that night. The clouds came over. The sun and moon were hidden. The place turned black. This is history painting, if you want to put it that way. And that degree that it's to which it's convincing enables him, to further reach you. So again, I was talking about Rubens. You can see this is I'm going to keep on calling it cartoon-like, even when he paints a woman, a portrait, and you'll see the difference. I'm not telling you Rubens should become Van Dyck. I'm telling you that Van Dyck actually reaches you. This is because of that. This is a story. It becomes abstract. It becomes a tale out there. This comes from a different place, a considerably more soulful place. So that would have to do with your purpose and that sort of thing, but it doesn't mean anything about which is better. There are different purposes for different pictures. And even though these guys actually illustrate a story, I mean, Van Dyck also illustrates a story. His work would be inferior to I mix those things up, skip the story part. Van Dyck's work would be inferior to Rubens if he didn't get proportions well, if he didn't get color relations well, if he didn't design well. And but in the sense of just the likeness, being true to nature, proportions, perspective, all kinds of things come into play. Modeling, color, skin color, color relations. And so that's what we're talking about, that proximity to nature, that mastery, that keep your feet on the ground, and you'll be a better painter than if you don't, right? And so you'll see guys just taking liberties, and that's what we're really talking about in this area. So here's Fragonard, and he's a very amusing guy, but in the end, I much prefer, just simply of those people of that era, I much prefer Watteau. And you can see the reason for me is simply not, I'm not trying to get him to be photographic. I just prefer him because if he appears to be doing similar things, they're both fantasy things, maybe out of stories, poetry, these tales, these subjects. But there's something about these things, there's something about this that's less convincing. So it becomes a frivolity, and you'd say, well, he's not really trying to be convincing. He's trying to actually be frivolous. He's trying to make a playful wall. And that's a reason you would do that. And yet, in this kind of a work, you'd then say, and how are the parts relating to each other? Is the anatomy true? Are the color relations to each other true? And that's the proximity of nature. And each guy who does this sort of thing has to have that going on. Warm shadows, cool lights, whatever it is that's true to nature. Your picture will be more acceptable, more believed, more credible. The more it approximates the look of nature. Not that it should become impressionism, not even a little bit. It shouldn't become what it ain't. Okay, so these are all these different sorts of work, if you want to call them forms within our form. So, but that's just so. Here I am talking about what difference it makes. So I'm sitting here and I don't have a frivolous mind. So I simply go to this guy, and this guy doesn't get to just play little games. He actually, once he starts up in this world of, so we say, realism, of the sort that it is. I mean, it's not true. It's not really realism, but of the sort that it is, he has to be convincing in everything he makes. So this reminds me quite a lot of what's his name, the great landscape painter of that era would have done if he painted figures. It strikes me that that's what he would have done. These landscapes are so like his. Claude Lorraine is who I'm thinking of. So I'm saying probably too much. All I'm doing here, again, back to these, remember these from last week, from the last video. These are two different ways of thinking about painting, entirely different. So each of them has to be credible to nature in its own way. And the less there, so like this one here has a little bit less credibility to nature. It doesn't feel like it's really all there quite. Values look a little funny in certain places, in certain relations. So I find that this one actually strikes me as being less credible in its truth to nature than this one. But that doesn't mean that either one of them is less or more realism or more simply proximal to nature, which isn't the point. So, but in terms of just the internal relationships, are they true to nature? That sort of discussion. I find this one in its own world, in its own right, more credible. Now, a bunch of stuff that he does doesn't impress you much at all. And you can see him struggling and searching, but he's constantly searching. This is Monet, is constantly searching for that convincing interplay between all the colors that holds this secret truth, this new truth, right? Anyway, let's not make more of it than that. I wanted to say this primarily to say that I don't say there's a better kind of painting than another. I say that in this conversation about Antaeus and about truth to nature, we're talking about your credibility. So you yourself will continually try to make your pictures more believable. And that's really all we're talking about. And so your believability hangs in, to some degree, the way you told the story, if you're a storyteller, and in another way, in the way you have the relationships of values and those sorts of things right and don't miss. And so, yeah, one little point, and it takes me a half hour, right? No, it didn't. Good. Let's just wander back through and see if there's anything else to mention. I do have the idea of. What's the other story? If I can get it back, I'm going to remember it just a little bit later. Another excellent story related to this. But the mastery of truth, this is what we're after as a piece of our lineage, shall we say. There's something in what we're doing that is about nature. Obviously, we're representational painters. We're representing nature. And the degree to which, in whatever one of these forms, be it more caricature, be it more decorative, be it more inclined to mood, whatever it is, your capacity to express the truth in that area is your planting of your feet on the ground. And so taking it just as simply as that and making no more out of it, I would just leave you with that little thought. Let's see, do you think a painter's better because he can copy well what he sees? Yep. Perhaps in the Boston School of thought, but other schools don't pursue that. Actually, all schools pursue that. If you have three guys in the room and they all are doing decorative paintings, the guy who can make a better likeness, let's say the guy with the skills to make a better likeness is going to be a better one. It's going to be the better painter. Now, I would say that only in the sense that the other guys may be better at the caricature part or the decorative part. So if all other things being equal is always what you have to say. If all other things being equal, if they're all equally decoratively good, and one of them is stronger in his ability to see color relationships in their fundamental rightness for the situation in which you're painting, that person actually will, or that person at that time will actually have more gravitas. Is that the right word for this? Yeah. I feel like I'm beating around the bush, but it's a simple concept. Just keep your feet planted on the ground, and then read the good painters talking about it and see what they're really saying. When they say that, I don't want to over-examine it, what's the right word? I don't want to over-explicate it. It can be done. It's an obvious term. It's one of these things we hold to be self-evident, right? And so, which is one of my favorite terms, one of those great terms coming out of the American Revolution, the American founding. We hold these terms to be self-evident. All right. So, thank you, Norma. Nice contribution. Very nice. Thank you. Merry Christmas to you too. And to all the rest of you, I think I will be on at least once more, if not twice, before the Christmas holidays actually show up. But in any case, yeah, have a good week until then. All right. If you're in the Northeast here, you're probably enjoyed some serious snow. We were between a 40-inch group of people and we were the 10-inch, sort of 12-inch level. But within 30 miles of us, there was 40 inches of snow. So we were a little bit thankful to have missed that. The kids probably would be much happier with it. But all right. Well, thank you, and see you next time.